once more, we're going back to the age of almost the cowboy politics that the CIA carried out in the 50s and 60s. They claim, as a result of the Church Committee and other revelations, that they don't do that anymore. Well, this administration is not only not saying that, but they're saying that it's now legal, and now they're being very upfront about covert activity. In many cases, the covert activities are now being overt activities.
It's been talking about the CIA being the main focus of this bill, but it isn't just the CIA, it's the FBI, where they're involved in, quote, anti-terrorist activities, and of course Reagan has said anybody who dissents is a terrorist and involved in disinformation. That's no exaggeration.
That's correct.
And also any of the other government or military intelligence organizations.
I think many Americans, as a result of these two matters and others also, will begin to learn what it's like to live in a third world country which is being targeted by the CIA. Many Americans have lost sight of the fact that many citizens of other countries, particularly in the third world, have been the victims of massive CIA operations, covert operations. Everything from recruitment to bribery to buying of an election, on up the line to paramilitary activities and terrorism, training and torture, and even assassination and overthrowing of governments. And I think that Americans fail to realize this until it starts sometimes to hit them at home. And that's apparently what's going to be happening now, and legally. This administration makes no bones that it wishes to, that it sees its own people, many of us, as the enemy. And in fact, there are many people, I think, in the country who consider themselves very middle of the road, who would be opposed to this.
It is absolutely incompatible with our system of government as we have known it in the past. Moreover, it's written to include, obviously, more than the CIA.
That was
all government agencies that have a right to secrecy will be included in this thing.
John, this is literally unconstitutional, though.
This is absolutely unconstitutional.
Freedom of speech.
It seems to us that there are people in Congress who are prepared to relegate the First Amendment to a lower priority, and they are more interested in what they call national security. One member of Congress, as well as one deputy director of the CIA, once stated that the First Amendment, that's only an amendment. It seems to me that's a rather shocking description of one of the hallmarks of our Constitution.
This is why I call it their greatest operation, is they're doing it without a constitutional amendment, which is beautiful in itself. If they propose to have all the states ratify a bill saying throw out freedom of speech and freedom of the press and give the CIA a law, it would never pass. But on the one hand, they're doing it without constitutional amendments, and two, they're doing it without the nation even being aware of it, which says something about the vigilance of Americans and their own feelings about their freedom of speech and press. They could care less. They would rather watch a football game.
Why is this the case, or why have they gotten so far with it without media scrutiny, without public uproar, etc.? It's not just the apathy of the people. Isn't it also that the media just hasn't reported on what's involved in this?
Well, the media in this country is the most apathetic that I've ever seen in the world in terms of playing ball with the administration. 80% of our news is reporting quotations of political leaders. President Reagan giving a speech in which everything he says is either distortions of historical fact or propaganda statements, in effect.
Or bald-faced lies.
Or bald-faced lies, all mixed together, and yet the press will report his speech as a fact. It is a fact. He made a speech. He said those words, but they don't say at the end, and everybody in the room, that it was all balderdash. Now, there's a little bit more of that with Reagan than there was with other presidents because he makes these misstatements so constantly. He gets the facts screwed up so much. But the press doesn't have any sense of defending its own rights. We have had an occasional editorial, including in the Austin American-Statesman, saying that the Names of Agents bill is unfortunate. And that's about the size. The New York Times ran an editorial saying, this is unfortunate. They said it was kind of wistful. I read it when I was on my way to lecture at Yale and Wesleyan a couple of months ago, and I read it in the New York Times. They were saying, golly gee whiz, they mean this thing to apply to us too.
Yeah, there was another one which they mentioned Lewis Wolf, and they said, well, it's a bad bill, but on the other hand, we've got to take care of people like Lewis Wolf and maybe John Stockwell.
They cannot believe that that such a thing will actually apply to them.
But unfortunately, the CIA has many allies in Congress and some even in the media. And so sometimes you can pick up a newspaper and read some of the CIA's own propaganda coming from some of those people.
What is the source of the CIA's power in Washington?
Well, I think it's the whole idea that the CIA has built up, even in the halls of Congress, that it is somehow a sacred entity, and that while there was a lot of criticism of J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, not a whole lot of it while he was alive, it's all happened since he died. It's interesting because it is known, for example, that Hoover had a lot of information and a lot of very damaging information against members of Congress. It is also clear that the CIA maintains relations with a number of Congress people, some of whom have said so on the floor of Congress, that they are in close contact with the CIA. And this bill, for example, which was written by the CIA, and they said so. Deputy Director Frank Carlucci said it on national television back in 1978, and said, we are now about to deliver this bill up to Congress. That's a little bit of a strange way for laws to be written, if they're going to be written by the CIA.
Now, what this bill is, it's part of a number of bills and legal precedents that the government is obtaining to keep. Now, they're not going to go out and arrest the editor of the New York Times and put him in jail for 10 years the week after this bill is passed. They're not that stupid. But they're getting, they may arrest Lew Wolf if he violates it. I think they probably would, because they could make propaganda out of such an arrest. But what they're doing is they're getting that bill, they're getting the passport ruling, for example. They're getting the other legal precedents, such as the lawsuit against Frank Snepp, Marchetti, and myself, and travel restrictions. They're getting authority for the Secretary of State to throw people out of the country who should have political exile here, such as the El Salvadorian refugees. And they're getting these things ready so that the next war that they get us into, as in Vietnam, they will have the legal power, muscle, to handle it differently than they did during the Vietnam War.
They handled the Senate home to make it impossible to speak out.
The dissent that choked off Kissinger's and Nixon's, and before that Rusk's, efforts in Vietnam, the popular uprising at home that forced the United States government to abandon its policies and plans in Vietnam, will not be the government will have weapons to crush such a thing in the future. It'll have an Official Secrets Act to make it illegal to publish stories like My Lai and whatnot, because there were obviously secret agents involved. So the publication of the My Lai stories would be a felony. Jane Fonda and Cora Weiss's travels to try to make communication and establish some basis for working out a peaceful solution to the thing, they would snap their passports up in the future. And then the other restrictions on travel, the other restrictions on government agents, so that an officer who's been in the service can't stop and say, we were bombing villages and bombing churches and schools. That would be a felony. He would go to jail. It's a British Official Secrets Act with a different name.